Purpose is very important, even when it comes to work. And more important than having a purpose is having a right purpose. In Ecclesiastes 4, verse 4 to 8, Solomon speaks exactly on that. In verse 4 he says, "Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind." Solomon warns us that if we work out of envy, if we work to compete with others, if we work simply because others are working and we want to compete with them, then Solomon says it's a striving after the wind. And so when we work or when we do anything, any project, we're engaged in anything, we ought to do them for the right reason. If we don't do it for the right reason, Solomon says it's a striving after the wind. If it's, and he mentions here, if it's out of envy, it's a striving after the wind. So why do you do the things you do? Why do I do the things that I do? Let me go to verse 6. Solomon in verse 6 presents the consequence of laboring in such a way. He says, "Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after the wind." The word for quietness, which Solomon employs here, is nakhat, and it means to be in tranquility or to be at peace. So Solomon says the one who works out of pride or because he's envious of the other is a person who has no satisfaction, no tranquility with the labor. They never have peace. Why? Because they will always compare themselves to another person. They will always try to do better than someone else. Their objective will be comparing themselves with people instead of just achieving their goal and their God-given purpose with that labor or with that task. So they will never have peace. And that's a danger that we need to avoid. So this, Solomon says, is also a striving after the wind. Imagine you toil with 2 hands, Solomon says, and it's a striving after the wind. Verse 7 and 8. "Again I saw vanity under the sun." Verse 8. "One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, 'For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure?' This also is vanity and an unhappy business." Solomon says individuals who work or labor out of envy of other people's labor, they will never be satisfied with riches. And in fact, Solomon in chapter 1 already told us of the vanity of working for wealth because they do not satisfy. And so Solomon here mentions a person who labors with the wrong purpose will never be satisfied with anything. And he speaks here of riches. And it's interesting of how many people are so wealthy, so famous, but yet they are not satisfied with what they had. And many of them mention that they thought if they had the wealth and the fame that they now have, they would be happy. But they end up even committing suicide and being disgusted with what they have. Solomon goes on to say, "So that he never asks, 'For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure?'" So Solomon once again here sneaks in the importance of knowing why we are toiling. Why do we do what we do? And he says, "Why am I depriving myself of pleasure?" It seems that the sacrifices I am making in order to do the work that I am doing are in vain because the purpose is not there. Or better yet, in this context actually, because of the wrong purpose. At many times we have a purpose, but that purpose is wrong. We have a motive, and that motive is wrong. We have a drive, and that drive is selfish. Solomon says, all the sacrifices one makes when the purpose of the business is wrong, that sacrifice Solomon says, is vanity and an unhappy business. And this is a very valuable advice. A very valuable advice for us. And so as we do whatever we do, whether we are studying, whether we are teaching, whether we are preaching, whether we are singing, whatever task, whatever job, as a businessman, as a doctor, as a nurse, as a poet, whatever it is that we do, why do we do what we do? If it is not for the glory of God, and if it is not something aligned with God, and if we are not doing a God-given task, then Solomon says it's going to be a business without peace, without tranquility, a business of which the sacrifices one makes will be vanity. It will mean nothing. The pleasure we deprive ourselves of in order to do those things will be just a waste of time. And Solomon finally says, this also is vanity and an unhappy business. May we be engaged in happy businesses instead of unhappy businesses. And the reason why many, although they seem to achieve a certain so-called success, but yet they are unhappy, at many times is because of the purpose and the motive as to why they do what they do. May God bless you.